took me a long time to realize that love in my family wasn't equal. As a kid, I thought every household worked like mine, where some rules applied to one sibling but not the other, where one child's mistakes were brushed off while others were never forgotten. I thought maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe I was overreacting. But the older I got, the more obvious it became. When my brother wanted a new bike, my parents got him the best one they could find. When I asked for one, they had told me I needed to learn the value of money and save up for it myself. He got birthday parties, vacations, brand new clothes. I got whatever was left over. Be responsible. Set a good example. You're older, you should know better. It wasn't just about material things. It was the way they looked at him, with pride, with warmth, with unconditional love. And then there was me. Always trying, always reaching, but never quite enough. I spent years convincing myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need their approval. But deep down, I did. And one day, something happened that made it impossible to keep lying to myself. I always told myself I was being dramatic, that all parents had favorites, but it didn't mean they loved their other kids any less. Maybe I was just too sensitive. Maybe if I worked harder, did better, I could earn the kind of love and attention my brother got so effortlessly. So I tried. I got good grades. Great grades. I followed every rule, never got into trouble, never asked for anything unless I absolutely had to. I helped around the house, took on responsibilities without complaint, did everything a good kid was supposed to do. But no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. Meanwhile, my brother could do no wrong. When he got a bad grade, my parents made excuses. The teacher must be unfair. Math just isn't his strong suit. When I got a B instead of an A, I was met with disappointment. What happened? You usually do better. When he got in trouble at school, it was boys will be boys. If I forgot to do the dishes one night, I was hit with a lecture about responsibility. It wasn't just about rules, it was everything. He got new clothes every school year while I wore hand-me-downs. He got birthday parties, vacations, and endless praise while I got expectations. One Christmas, we both made wish lists. His had expensive things. A gaming console, designer sneakers, concert tickets. Mine, a few books, some art supplies, nothing crazy. Christmas morning came, and sure enough, he got everything he asked for. I got socks, a sweater that wasn't even in my size, and a random book my mom picked up last minute because she didn't know what else to get. I told myself gifts didn't matter. It wasn't about material things. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more obvious it became. At dinner, they always asked my brother about his day, his interests, his goals. Me? I could be sitting right there, and it was like I wasn't even part of the conversation. He played sports, and they never missed a game. I got an award for academic achievement, and they couldn't even remember what it was for. One of the worst moments was when my brother wrecked his car. It was his fault, speeding in the rain, showing off for his friends. He was lucky to walk away with just a few bruises. The car, completely totaled. I expected my parents to be furious, to ground him, to at least make him take responsibility. But instead, they bought him a brand new car the next week. A newer model, more expensive, better than the one he crashed. When I asked about it, my mom just sighed. "We had to, sweetie. He needs a car to get around." I stared at her. "So do I." She gave me a look like I was being difficult. "You take the bus. You've always been so independent." Right. Independent. The word they used whenever they didn't feel like giving me what they freely handed to him. But nothing compared to the night of my high school graduation. It was supposed to be a big deal. I'd worked my ass off for years, maintained a perfect GPA, even got a scholarship to a great university. I wasn't expecting some grand celebration, but I thought at least for one night, my parents would be proud of me. Instead, they barely acknowledged it. My brother had a soccer game that day. It wasn't even a championship, just some regular match. He played almost every weekend, and yet my parents skipped my graduation ceremony to go watch his game. I remember sitting there, cap and gown on, scanning the crowd for them. People were hugging their families, taking pictures, laughing, and I stood there alone, my stomach sinking, my heart pounding as I realized they never even showed up. After the ceremony, I got a single text from my mom. "Congrats, hope you had fun. Your brother scored the winning goal. We'll celebrate later this week." Later this week never happened. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't just being dramatic. I wasn't imagining things. I'd spent years trying to prove myself to people who had already decided that I wasn't worth as much. I started keeping track, mentally at first. Then one day I actually wrote it down. Every time they praised him, every time they brushed me aside, every time they made me feel like I was just there. The list got long, too long. And one night I finally snapped. We were at dinner and my brother was talking about how he had accidentally dented Dad's car. My stomach dropped waiting for the fallout. But my parents laughed. My dad waved it off saying, "It happens. Just be more careful next time." I stared at them, then at him. That was it? A few months before, I had forgotten to lock the front door when I came home late, and they gave me a full lecture on being careless, irresponsible. They didn't let me hear the end of it for weeks. I put my fork down, my hands shaking. That's it? He damages a car, and it's just, be more careful? My mom barely glanced at me. It's different. How? She sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. Because he didn't mean to. You can't compare situations like that. I let out a dry laugh. Right, because when I make a mistake, it's a learning opportunity. When he does it, it's just one of those things. My dad frowned. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Nothing. It was always nothing when it came to me. I pushed my chair back and stood up. My parents looked at me like I was being dramatic again. But I couldn't sit there anymore. I couldn't pretend I didn't see it. My brother smirked. He knew. He had always known. And he had never let me forget it. That was the moment I stopped trying. Stopped hoping they would change. Stopped trying to prove myself to people who had already decided that I wasn't worth as much. That night I went up to my room and stared at the list I had written. Every little thing, every moment, every time they made me feel invisible. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them make me feel like this forever. I wasn't going to keep begging for their love. Because if I had to beg for it, was it even real in the first place? That was the night I started planning my way out. And the day I finally walked away, they didn't even try to stop me. I thought about leaving for years. But something always stopped me. The little voice in my head telling me I was overreacting. The hope that maybe, just maybe one day, my parents would wake up and realize what they had done. But after graduation, after watching them celebrate my brother's regular soccer game more than they celebrated one of the biggest moments of my life, something inside me finally snapped. I started planning. At first, it was small things. Researching apartments, figuring out my finances, seeing how much I could save. I worked extra hours at my part-time job, stashing away every dollar I could without them noticing. I told myself I'd leave after college, that it made the most sense to be patient. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't wait that long. The moment that solidified my decision came a few months later. It was my brother's birthday. My parents went all out. Expensive dinner, a huge party, balloons, decorations, everything. They rented a venue, invited all of his friends, spent money like it was nothing. I sat at the table watching them beam at him as if he was the greatest thing to ever happen to them. Then my mom turned to me, smiling like she had just remembered I existed. "Oh, we never did anything for your birthday, did we? We should do a little something this weekend." I stared at her, waiting for her to realize how insane that sounded. My birthday had been 2 months ago. They didn't forget. They just didn't care enough to do anything. I forced a smile, and that's okay. It's not a big deal. My brother laughed. Wow, still trying to guilt trip them? That was it. I felt something inside me go cold. I was done. That night, after they all went to bed, I opened my laptop and started applying for apartments. I had already saved enough for a deposit. I'd already mapped out my expenses. I just needed the final push. And, like clockwork, my parents gave it to me. A week later, I came home from work to find my mom in my room going through my stuff. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't even look guilty. "Oh, I was just tidying up. You leave things such a mess." I wasn't messy. My room was always organized. She wasn't cleaning. She was snooping. I saw my desk drawer slightly open, the one where I kept my savings envelope. My stomach twisted. I walked over, heart pounding, and pulled it out. The money was gone. I turned to her, gripping the empty envelope. "Where is it?" She had the audacity to look confused. "Where is what?" I held up the envelope. "The money that was in here. Where? Is it?" She waved a hand like it was nothing. "Oh, that. I borrowed it for some bills. You don't pay rent, so it's only fair you contribute, don't you think?" I could barely breathe. "That wasn't for you. That was my money." She scoffed. You live under our roof, eat our food. You wouldn't have that job if it weren't for us driving you there when you were younger. You owe us. Owe them? For what? For the years I spent being their unpaid babysitter? For being the child they ignored while they showered my brother with love? I saw red. Give it back. Don't be so dramatic. It was just sitting there. I knew in that moment that if I didn't leave now, I never would. So I did. The next morning, while they were out running errands, I packed everything I could into 2 suitcases. Clothes, personal documents, the essentials. I left behind anything I could replace. My heart pounded in my chest the entire time, terrified they'd come home early. But I wasn't stopping. I'd already signed a lease. I'd already transferred what little savings I had left into a separate bank account, one they couldn't touch. And then I walked out that door. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. I just left. It wasn't until I was sitting in my empty apartment surrounded by boxes that I realized I had actually done it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't under their control. And then the calls started. First, it was my mom. Where are you? What the hell is this? Then my dad. You need to come home. Stop being childish. Then my brother. Wow, way to be a drama queen. I didn't answer. I let every call go to voicemail. Then came the texts. At first they were demanding, then they were guilt trips. After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us? You're being so selfish. We're your parents. You'll regret this. I blocked their numbers. For the first time in my life, I chose me. But the real kicker? The moment I knew I had done the right thing? A month later, a distant relative reached out. Hey, I don't know if you heard, but your parents are struggling with money. They're telling everyone you abandoned them. I laughed. Of course. Of course, they were painting themselves as the victims. They weren't upset because they missed me. They were upset because I had stopped being useful. I didn't reply. I didn't care. Because for the first time, I wasn't the forgotten child. I wasn't the invisible one. I was free. I thought leaving would be the hardest part, but it wasn't. The hardest part was realizing how easy it was to move on without them. At first, I expected to feel guilty. I expected to wake up in my tiny apartment surrounded by unpacked boxes and second-guess everything. But that moment never came. Instead, I felt relief. No more walking on eggshells, no more fighting for scraps of attention, no more waiting for love that was never going to come. Of course, my parents didn't make it easy. Even after I blocked their numbers, they found ways to get to me. Emails, messages through distant relatives. Even my old friends started texting me, asking why I'd suddenly cut off my loving family. I could see the narrative they were spinning, how I had abandoned them after everything they had sacrificed for me. But the worst was my mother. She wasn't just angry. I think for the first time in her life she was actually scared. Not scared of losing me, but scared of losing control over me. She sent me an email that started out sweet. We miss you, sweetheart. You don't have to stay away forever. Family is family, after all. Then when I didn't respond, the tone shifted. Ignoring us isn't going to change the fact that we raised you, that we gave you everything. You're being selfish. Then when that didn't work, she went for the guilt. Your father's not doing well. He's been so stressed since you left. We don't have the money to cover all the bills. We're barely getting by, and your brother, he's been so worried about you. My brother, the golden child, the one who had mocked me for years, who had stood by while I was ignored, who never once cared about my struggles. Now he was worried? Yeah, right. I almost laughed. I could see exactly what was happening. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They weren't reaching out because they had realized their mistakes. They were reaching out because they needed something. Because I was the responsible one. Because I had always been the one to clean up after them. Because now that I was gone, there was no one left to take care of them. Then the final straw came. One of my aunts reached out, someone who had never been particularly close to me before. She left a voicemail, her voice dripping with fake concern. Sweetheart, I just wanted to check on you. Your parents are really going through a hard time. You know, they did everything for you growing up. I just don't understand why you would cut them off like this. It's breaking their hearts. Breaking their hearts? Where was this concern when I was a child, crying myself to sleep because my parents never once made me feel like I mattered? Where was this sympathy when they missed my graduation, when they treated me like an afterthought? Where was this compassion when I was working myself to exhaustion just to prove I was worth something to them? I stared at my phone, shaking my head. They didn't want me back. They wanted their punching bag back. So I did the one thing that sealed my freedom for good. I changed my number, deleted my old email, cut off every single person who tried to drag me back in. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. Not just physically, not just because I had my own space, my own money, my own life, but because I had finally let go of the need to be wanted by people who had never valued me in the first place. They had their favorite child. They could keep him, because I was finally done being their afterthought. I used to think that family was everything, that no matter what, you stood by them, forgave them, and kept trying, because that's just what you were supposed to do. But now, I know better. Family isn't about blood. It's about who chooses to love you, who treats you with respect, who actually cares about you as a person, not as a resource, not as an obligation. The people who truly love you don't make you feel like you have to earn it. For so long, I thought if I worked harder, if I proved myself, if I just did more, then maybe they'd finally love me the way they love my brother. But the truth is, some people will never see your worth, no matter how much you give. And that's not my fault. It's not your fault either. If you're the one who always gives, the one who's expected to sacrifice, the one who gets less because you're strong enough to handle it, I want you to know something. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to put yourself first. You're allowed to stop giving to people who only take. And if they call you selfish for it, that's just proof they never really cared about you, only about what you could do for them. I spent years begging for love I should have never had to beg for. And the moment I stopped, I realized how much better life is when you surround yourself with people who actually choose you. And I don't regret it for a second.